Hello, Algebra 1 students. This is lesson 66 and 67. We're combining those both into one because, well, neither one of them are that hard, and I think you can do both of them at once. And so our objective simply is, how do you solve and graph inequalities? And before we can solve and graph inequalities, we have to answer these 4 questions that are on this page. First of all, what is an inequality? Well, an equality is whenever things are equal. Like, so if you were to say x equals 2, that is an equality, an equation, right? Where they say they're equal to each other. So an inequality is whenever they're not equal. Now there's several different ones that we work with. For instance, one of them might be x does not equal to 2. That's an inequality. But these ones we're not going to be working with much today, although it is an inequality. Most of them, or all of them we're working with today, are whenever we say something like this: x is less than 2. Now, it kind of changes our number of answers, because something like this has one answer. Only x equals to 2 fulfills that equation. So the only thing you could plug in there for x would be 2 to make that thing true. However, with this one over here, there's actually infinitely many answers that would become true for this, because I could plug in 1, I could plug in 0, I could plug in negative 1 million, or 0.5, or 3/5, right? Or 5/4, 5/4. Any of those would make this true. And so now we don't just have one answer, we have an infinite number of answers. And so we either write it like this, or we graph it on a number line. So to graph it on a number line, there would be like a 2, and then we would say all of them this way. And whenever you have the computer, and you'll see that in a little bit, they shade that real nicely. Most of the time what we end up doing is something more like this, and just drawing an arrow over the top of it. So now the question is, how do you graph this, like a less than, versus a less than or equal to? Because we could have said this, right? X is less than or equal to 2, meaning it could be 2 or any number smaller than 2. So how do we show the difference between them? And the answer to that is in our circles. Notice right up here, I used an open circle and 2. So if I was going to draw something like this, x is less than 2, I would have used an open circle like this, meaning it does not include that 2. However, if I would have had something like this, x is less than or equal to 2, I would have graphed it with a closed circle or a filled-in circle, like that. So you know that anytime you see a closed circle, you're talking about a less than or equal to, or maybe a greater than or equal to. And if you see an open circle, then you're talking about a less than or a greater than. So it does not include that number that the circle's on. Alright, how do you know which way to graph? Well, let's think about something, or the easiest way to answer that is just like think about it. Here's 2, which means that 3 is going to be to the right, and 1 is going to be smaller. So we're going to stick with that same thing. If I have x is less than 2, I'm going to use an open circle. We just talked about that on 2. And then just think about what numbers you could plug in. If I plugged a 1 in there, meaning if I said 1 is less than 2, does that come out to be true? Well, yes, it does. So then I would want to graph it in that direction, right? Because I'm saying everything on this number line smaller than 2 is the solution to that. However, if I had picked one on the right hand side, like say 3 is less than 2, does that come out to be true? Well, no, it doesn't, which means I would not want to graph that way, because those ones are false. Those ones don't make it true. So you have to kind of think about which way does it fill in. The other way to think about it is to say x's are smaller than 2, because remember the alligator always eats the bigger number. So that means I'm going to go numbers to the left. But also remember, you could write the same thing as 2 is greater than x, and it would still be graphed to the left. The last question is, how do I solve them? So this one, like this, I don't need to solve. However, if I had something like this, 3x minus 4 is less than 7, I'm just making that up, how would I solve it? And the short answer is you solve it just the same way you would solve this equation. 3x minus 4 is equal to 7. With one exception. The one exception, please put this in your notes somewhere, that was supposed to be a star, is if you multiply or divide by a negative number, you have to flip the inequality. So one more time, if you multiply or divide both sides of an inequality by a negative number, so if you multiply by a -7 or divide by -2, you must flip the inequality, and that would mean changing it from this direction to that direction, or from like this to like this. Alright, enough talk, let's get working here. So it says solve each inequality and graph. So here we go, I need to add 4 to both sides. So I'm going to end up with r is greater than 2, because -2 plus 4 comes out to be 2. So I'm going to put an open circle right there on 2, and since r is bigger than 2, meaning numbers like 3, 4, 5 would make that true, right? 5 is bigger than 2. I'm going to color that to the right. To solve number 10, x is being divided by 11, so I'm going to do the opposite of dividing, which is multiplying by 11. So I'm going to end up with 22 is greater than x, because those ones right there become 1. So 22 is right here. Again, I'm going to do an open circle, because I just have a greater than. And notice here, the x's are smaller than 22. 22 is the bigger one. So I'm going to color this to the left. This one here, don't freak out because there's fractions and stuff. Just think about what you need to do. I need to get that b by itself. B is being divided by 15, so then I'm going to multiply by 15. If you think of it as 15 over 1, might make that simpler, but whatever floats your boat. These 15s reduce to be 1. So I end up with b is less than, well, 5 goes into 5 1 times and into 15 3 times. So less than 9 over 1, or 9. So open circle on the 9. Since b is smaller, that means 6, 7, and 8 are smaller, so I'm going to go to the left on that. Alright, let's try 2 more. Again, I'm just working our way up. We're getting a little bit more complicated. Let's see here. So I'm trying to isolate that p. So the first thing I'm going to do is add 4. So I'm going to get negative 9p is less than or equal to 45. Let me erase those just so I'll have room later. Then I'm going to divide by negative 9. Whoop, 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 whoop. Yes, there's an alarm going off. Why is there an alarm going off? Because I said we're going to divide by a negative number. Remember, whenever we divide by a negative number, we must change that sign. So these reduce and end up with p. 45 over 9 is 5. Since it's a negative 9, it's going to come to be negative 5. And since I divided by a negative number, I have to change the direction of that inequality. So notice right here, it said less than or equal to. Now I've changed it to saying greater than or equal to. So now to graph that, I'm going to put a closed circle on negative 5. And now the p is greater than the negative 5. So 1 is greater than negative 5, or 0. So that means I'm going to go to the right. Number 16. So don't freak out just because there's a fraction. Deep breath, you'll be okay. Notice this thing right here, both of these are being divided by that negative 15. So the opposite of dividing by is going to be to multiply by. So this is being divided by that. So I'm going to multiply by the negative 15. Woot, 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 woot. Again, the alarm is going off. Why? Because I multiplied by a negative number. So since I multiplied by a negative number, I'm going to have to change the direction of that sign. So these negative 15s reduce, end up with n minus 4. I'm going to change it to a greater than. And then this is going to change to a positive 15, because negative 1 times negative 15, remember this is multiplying there. comes out to be a positive 15. Okay, so now I'm going to add 4. End up with n is greater than 19. So I'm going to put an open circle right on 19. Since n is bigger than that, I'm going to go off to the right. Feel free to watch this again if you need to. Feel free to ask questions as needed, but I'm sure you're going to do great.